Bride of Christ, O glorious, arise, O sons of God, victorious. Our day of glory dawns before us. Be strong in His mighty power. Be strong in His mighty power. Be strong.
We are here discussing this morning
Be strong.
the Coleman Hughes Ta-Nehisi Coates exchange before the US congressional hearings on reparation last year. It's quite an exchange. George, once you had viewed it, you seemed quite eager to want to discuss it.
Reparations is one of those topics that has, riveted the imagination of a lot of people. People who I think weren't so interested in it got interested in it. People who never really cared about the subject started to care about it last year, and I think it was because of all the emotions that we were swept up in post George Floyd. It was a very horrible to witness the death of a black man calling for his mother, heartless police officer keeping his knee on this man's neck. And I think that brought up centuries of oppression, people's awareness. It stirred up people's awareness of centuries of oppression of Black people. I mean, I heard some of my friends saying this has been going on for 400 years. And I had to say to them, I said, well, we can't diminish the struggle to achieve emancipation from slavery and all the things that took place even after that, a century and a half since the abolition of slavery. We shouldn't diminish the people who fought for the rights that we enjoy today. But the truth is that I think there is a just case for reparations. And I've always felt that, and I have a strong feeling about that. So to see these two intelligent Black men, first of all, two intelligent African Americans, um, going toe to toe on the merits of the case for reparations was very, very interesting. I know a little bit more about Ta-Nehisi Coates than I do about Coleman Hughes, but they represent two different sides of the political divide. I think Coleman is perhaps more conservative in his politics, um, and I think Ta-Nehisi would quite readily admit that he is left of center. He's liberal or progressive, however he wants to style himself, but certainly left of center. And on this issue, Ta-Nehisi clearly sees that there is a case for reparations, and Coleman makes very strong points as to why maybe not. Maybe there really isn't a case for reparations. So I found it a very interesting video to watch, and I'm glad we're having this discussion.
That in my thinking, after I listened to it again last night, on my first listening, on my first viewing, I really thought that, how it was positioned, and that was how it was positioned, that Coleman was there basically to speak for the Republicans and Mitch McConnell and Coates, the liberals. But when I got into the meat of what was being said, I recognized that I agreed most wholeheartedly with both of them. And which was, hence my comment that what was regretful is the forum at which that discussion was taking place, because I think that with a unified consultation before a congressional hearing, speaking with one voice on terms of what was emphasized, would have been a stronger take. But let me just introduce into the conversation, something that we have talked about before, George, which is the whole business of, well, what is reparations? Is it basically a repayment, or is it a repair? And reparations is in fact, yes, it's a legal concept, but etymologically, it is basically from the word repair, not the word repay, which is kind of important to point out that something has been damaged, something has been broken, something has been uh, damaged or just broken or destroyed and must be repaired. And the repayment is in fact a means to an end and not the end in itself. And so in terms of our language, when we speak about reparations, we speak about, okay, advocacy in terms of justice and for repayment, such as the strong and potent arguments that um, Sir Hilary made in last August. But also there's a concept of self-repair, that basically if you damage me, yes, I have the choice to sue you and recover damages. But what if you don't want to pay? Am I going to be your victim? Or I can take responsibility and I can basically address the damage myself, which in fairness, Sir Hilary also basically quite clearly pointed out that the early spirit of certainly through epitomized in the manly leadership of the Caribbean countries at the time, hoping that it would have been a federation, and when that didn't work out, Jamaica went through. That if there ever was the spirit of a man, I mean a whole man, when you listen to the speeches that Manley put down in the British Parliament, Sir Alexander took the sir from them and bowed the knee to be knighted. And Manley said, no, I don't need it. I don't need your validation. That kind of full stature man and full stature leadership set Jamaica and the Caribbean on a path was, okay, you don't want to do what you rightfully should do, but we're going to take responsibilities, pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And we have basically done, as Beckles did point out, a remarkable job, which we don't give ourselves credit for enough. And part of the biggest thing, which is why those two videos are linked, because I think that the thing that has been broken the most through the experience of slavery has in fact been our minds, our thinking process. And that is the number one thing that needs to be repaired. And that all programs that deal with a change of attitude, that promote healthy changes of attitude, whether it be self-repair or repayment, the issue is that justice for ourselves demands that our failings be addressed. And in both Coates and both Ta-Nehisi and Coleman Hughes presentation, that's one thing that I found that they both strongly had convictions of. And even though some would take Coleman Hughes's arguments to be divisive and distracting, I think I heard his heart, and I think I understood that no, this fellow was quite right. He's saying, listen, you know, Jim Crow and slavery left its mark that remains to the present day. And his concern was that the HR 40 bill, which would convert what really needs to be a political coalition of citizens, as he said, um, convert that to some kind of a transaction. Okay, will you shut up if we give you X amount? And that not necessarily being adequate. I thought his quote about his fear that in fixing the past, they would sabotage fixing the present. I thought that was a really valid and a really potent point. And I think that's the danger of, in fact, some of our present reparations talks, that we um, if we if we speak from the position of victimhood,
Mhm.
Even with repayment, we will not have the spirit to address what needs to be addressed in repairing ourselves. And I do think that that's a trap that we need to avoid.
We need to not see it as an either or situation, just as you are saying, um, that if we are asking for reparations, it means that we are seeing ourselves as victims who cannot help ourselves. Um, and that, I think, is what we really need to speak to. Whenever the issue of reparation is raised, there there have always been those people who feel that that is a waste of time and energy, because that time and energy should would best be used fixing ourselves than waiting for somebody to fix us.
Even to hear the word ask for reparations
Mm-hmm.
makes me cringe. This is why I like Beckles so much. If you look at his advocacy throughout the years, the Durban Conference, when a black man who you're trying to make a victim stands up as a real man, it make everybody else cringe, And the first thing, of course, that they tried to do was to subvert Hillary through flattery. Oh, Sir Hillary, um, we know that you're right, but we can't bloody well allow you to sue our sovereign queen now, can we?
Mm.
You know. In fact, he wasn't Sir then. It's after that them give him the Sir because they recognize the man potent.
So,
And
so
so he got some. They gave him some money for the university and give him a Sir and hoped that he would be quiet.
I think he actually has a Bayesian knighthood, which the Bayesians and the Antiguans have their own knighthoods. So they got, like how we do national honors and awards, their government grants knighthood.
So it wasn't from the queen that he got it.
I doubt it. I'd have to double check, but that is my recollection.
Double check for me
But
because that would mean
some
that
might
I've been
argue,
deceived all these years.
some might argue that if you get it from the Barbados government, that's like as close as you can
Getting
get
it from
getting
the
it from the
from
queen.
the
queen.
queen without getting it from the queen.
I mean, the Bayesians
Yeah.
are more British than the British in many ways.
Afro-Saxon is the word. And by the way, that is just another demonstration of African adaptability and prowess.
And
Although it can also be assumed to be a fawning spirit.
When I got sworn in, my wife, who hates these kinds of ceremony, the one thing she got away from me being sworn in as a judge was the fact that she couldn't believe that what's his name, who Hall, who was Governor General at the time,
Kenneth,
as a historian, she said she couldn't just understand how Hall
how he did
could
it
be involved in
in
this
that.
pomp and
Yes,
pageantry, and he's a historian. She just couldn't
yes,
understand
yes.
Mhm.
why he
Well,
would want.
as I say, there are these anomalies. The spirit of a generation weepeth. I've
Yes.
had I've had conversations with quite a couple persons who speak about these things from their verandas, but for some reason, and that's why I say our attitude. That's one of the points that both Coleman and Coates were discussing. That our appreciation of our history,
Mm-hmm.
even if it is studied, it has not penetrated. Most people live in this kind of blissful ignorance. Um, with regards to the things of the past and where we're coming on from. And so therefore really don't have depth or a sense of an appropriate attitude towards, like what they were mentioning, for example, the business of the statues to Civil War
Mm-hmm.
heroes and stuff. I've had the same um, feeling, the same feeling here in Jamaica. Every time I used to go to King's House
Mm-hmm.
and play in this room with all of these white guys looking down on me, I felt defiled. I felt defiled. I said, "What are they still there looking down upon me? This is supposed to be my house." So I mean, we need to get rid of some of our fawning obeisance to the gods that I don't know if we're going to have the same kind of cathartic process here where a generation just decide for cast off all restraint. I hope not. But the fact is that both parties have shown promise in the past. But I mean, when PNP was in power years ago, that was one of the promises. Jamaica going to be a republic, going to get rid of the Queen. And then the JLP took the same. Both of
Mhm.
them are on record for saying that that's their political stance.
That's
Neither
right.
have had the political will to follow through.
So what I heard Hughes saying is that not because a person doesn't respond to a situation in the way that you do or you think they should, does it mean that uh, their response is not a valid one
Right.
for them? And that kind of threw me for a bit because, wow, it means we have to go deeper. It, I don't know. Because to me, if you understand what the intention of people was in the
Right.
past, and you still operate with an embracing acceptance of
Hmm.
what they're doing now and the impact that they're having in your space now, to me, that is it's requiring us to dig deeper into who we really are. But I mean, he had a point. This is the whole thing. I couldn't really, as you were saying, you found yourself agreeing with both of them.
Hmm.
Um, and I found with okay when I went among the Maroons in Moortown to work on my thesis. Fair enough. I didn't know as much as I thought I knew before I went, but I was really kind of blown away by certain things I found. Like, for example, I asked the question, what happened to all the African names? These were people who had escaped um, enslavement um, at different stages of the process. I thought that surely they would have retained their names um, because they wouldn't have forgotten them. And I figured because let's face it, they have the language still. So if they have the language, then they should still have the names. And I couldn't find any African names in Moortown at all. And I went to the
Hmm.
Anglican church and I saw them with their hats and their, everything just being British. And I thought, whoa, what happened here? And there are a couple explanations or suggestions or explanations that I came up with. But yeah, it is definitely a conversation that as Jamaican people we need to have, and we need to have it with an openness to accept
People's
different
positions.
people's
Yeah.
positions on the
Positions.
matter.
And
Yeah.
at the same time, Joe,
Hmm.
because as much as I don't agree flatly, I mean, I do think that my opinion is that Coleman is compromised on certain things, and
Yeah.
perhaps it's the kind of compromise that when you have a good internal Paul and Peter kind of thing,
Yes.
that are hypocrites. Sometimes people
Hmm.
just need a little prod to straighten them
Yeah.
out, right?
Yeah.
Because the fact is that that is what the enemy always wants to do: divide and conquer.
Yes.
Um,
What?
and I recognize what I call it the Homo Perkinsis. Um,
Mm.
that's you have Homo erectus, and then you have the Perkins is of course is from Wilmot Perkins, the kind of
Yeah.
intellectual person now who decides to justify your defense mechanisms that you have inherited the years for
Yeah.
survival's sake. But now
Yeah.
you decide, even when you can cast them off, you now
You,
decide to intellectually justify them
Yeah.
and it comes up with a particularly aberrant kind of
Wow.
arrogance
Wow.
that
Wow.
that is not helpful.
Because I was going to ask, I didn't do, and I mean, all I did was to watch the video, so I didn't know even the context in which the thing was taking place. Not, I never do no research. Do you
Mhm.
know anything about these two guys?
My first encounter with Hughes was this debate. I've
Mm-hmm.
known about Coates for a while. He's been
Yeah.
even before his first books, he's been winning just about every prize for journalism and for writing.
Without a degree too. What about that? He doesn't have a degree.
So this is what I was I said to, just trying to, because Marcel didn't get a chance to watch it, and I said to him, I just kept getting this uptown downtown vibe. Um,
Yeah, I think one of the things though, as we're having this discussion, I think reparations, what it would mean in an American context
hmm,
is very different from what it would
yeah.
mean in a West Indian context. And I think that's one of the things
Right.
that Coates has pointed out that, um, you know, and you've heard other commentators as well point out that if reparations is extended, if they do, there is a law passed and there is reparations that um, is extended to African Americans in some material form, then it would be unfair for persons, and I'm going to use a name, Kamala Harris, whose father was Jamaican, who came to the United States of America seeking opportunity in the 1960s, would have escaped all of the negative impact of, Jim Crow. Would never had to deal with that. And yes, he was a descendant of slaves in Jamaica, but the very different thing. There are some commentators who point out that to be an American who's a descendant of slaves is very different than to be somebody else, like a Kamala Harris. Um, Another target for those people who call themselves ADOS, African Americans descendants of slaves. Um, Another target for them is Joyanne Reed, who is on a journalist on MSNBC. Or I think one of her parents is from Ghana, or the other one is from Congo or someplace in Africa. And they can't relate to those persons, and they often feel that persons with that background, that ethnic background, look down on African Americans who have descended from you know
Ah,
enslaved black people in America. So
yeah.
it's in a sense it's interesting to look on their debate. Their some of the things they'll talk about in their debate we have to address, because obviously there are some people who um, the whole notion of reparations is anathema. They don't agree with it. They don't think that they should somehow pay for crimes done by a great 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 grandfather. They think that's wrong. Um, and so we have to struggle with that too here in the Caribbean. But some of the issues that they have to deal with in America are unique to their situation.
Yeah, and Hughes made reference to the difference between the Caribbean people, for example, and those who are African American, and that is so. But it was just in passing, kind of, and it's something that I would really like for us here to explore from within the context of the church in Jamaica and how we relate to African Americans, because I find that it's not that easy to build relationships. Um, it looked like it's easier for us to build relationships with white Americans than with African Americans.
I'm recognizing that I think there are some grounds that we should definitely cover in this
Yes.
conversation,
Okay.
as much as there are many directions in which we're going off. And what you started off, I hear the point about relationships and
Mm-hmm.
both recovering and the reordering of relationships, which
Mm-hmm.
comes with a clear mind as to who one is and identity issues being addressed. But the other matter, even if it is a subsidiary, I really do believe that what you that relationship is of vital importance, and we need to cover it. But in terms of this conversation, the issue there are pressing issues. Who, for those persons, and I think we may all be numbered among them, who
Mm-hmm.
feel that a demand for reparations is a righteous necessity. It is incumbent upon anybody of any consciousness and self-respect. We're going back to the devotion that we had several weeks ago, where we discussed what was it, Luke 17, that famous passage of scripture, which is oft imbalancedly treated in terms of theology, where Jesus says, if your brother sin against you 70 times, you must forgive him 70 times 7. And the scripture there, clear, I think it's Luke 17 or Luke 18. The scripture clearly says that, listen, when, first of all, number one, in life, offenses must come. So
Mm-hmm.
expect them. Transgressions, you will be transgressed against. And also you will transgress. And so the
Mm-hmm.
Christian attitude to transgression, which is what basically is in law called an offense, right? Is that when you are offended, you confront your
Mm-hmm.
offender. And so the confrontation is the first thing. And that's what we mean when we talk about a demand for reparations. It's a demand for justice. It's a confrontation. It is, hey, you can't get away with that. And that is the first thing Jesus says before him say, forgive nothing to anybody. He says, listen, when you are offended, confront the person. The second thing he says, okay, if the person recognizes and
Mm-hmm.
repents and repairs. The three conditions are right there in the verse, where it says that the person must hold on, first of all, recognize that, oh, yeah, he has done something wrong. And number two, he must also have an attitude to fix it. Then Jesus says, if that
Mm-hmm.
happens, then forgive him. And then the qualification comes.
What you
And
doing?
be ready to forgive such a person 70 times 7. The notion that forgiveness is something that is given freely without confrontation and without requirement
Wow.
for repentance and reparation is not scriptural. It is an unscriptural
Wow.
theology that is out there
Wow.
and that has twisted people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
So, so, so I think one of the things that we need to discuss, in other words, is all right, for those of us who are in a mode, a sanctified mind, to demand justice and to demand reparations. Let us say that it was forthcoming, or that there are agencies which will respond from whatever we're talking within our midst. I see that Reverend Collins is here from the United Church, and I see that the United Church has itself also, being an international church organization, felt that what the church needs to do is lead the way. Governments might not lead the way, but you have the white church and the black
Mm-hmm.
church, and you have church, in other words, churches from different nations which enjoy the benefits of different kinds of economies. And so let the church lead the way and show that, listen, we will set aside money for reparatory activity and share it with congregations and share it with
Mm-hmm.
so the question needs to be answered for those of us who are demanding reparations and expecting that something be, where does that money go to? If payment comes, who gets it and why? And those are some of what Coleman and Hughes basically that was part of what I found the dynamic of the exchange, that there was this incisive intellectual investigation into that kind of an answer. Because there are some, of course, who delight in us going back and forth between each other and would put one against the other so that they don't have to budge. But when there is a
Hmm.
united call and says, hold it, things definitely need to be repaired. And I know that Beckles has in his, I think he also mentioned it, you know, the pressing issues in the economies of the nation. I was asking George this morning, you know, I mean, I don't mean to talk long with it. I just want to set the platform for an exploration of that particular question. What are the priorities in reparatory activity?
Mm.
And those persons or those agencies, whether it be government or church or otherwise, how should the reparatory priorities be set? Because that is a conversation. Otherwise, we're going back to what we said earlier, Joe, where people just basically in a victim mentality and money come and is freeness and not get fixed. You know, we're in the
Hmm.
state, which is Coleman's point. That listen, how you can't repair the past and leave the present, the problems, and somebody needs to be,
Hmm.
in other words, have a present focus. What needs to be fixed now, right? Otherwise, it's
Hmm.
just a transaction that people can say, write a check and you stop hollering, stop bawling.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And so I felt that his approach was really incisive.
I feel like a lot of the discussion is going to sort of disintegrate around the issue of, so how does always reparation paid, always reparation addressed. Um, so I feel like it might be a worthwhile exercise to sort of spend some time majoring on that, because part of the disillusionment of those who feel like the reparation thing is that, no man, nobody with that, but nobody with that, no. you know, is this issue of payment, and that comes back down to one of the points that I don't know if it's Coates was making about, I don't need no money, don't give me no money, and sort of, and so finding ways of clarifying the fact that it is not just about money. It is not just
Hmm.
about writing a check and giving you back, but obviously there are issues of disenfranchisement, politically, educationally, and in terms of sense of
Hmm.
identity and pride. You know, that finding ways to repair some of those areas. Whether it is scholarships, for example, or whether it is um, other kinds of cultural um, acknowledgement. I don't know. So I'm thinking that, as I say, spending some time to understand what might be the various ways reparation could take shape is going to be
Yes.
an important
Um.
part of the conversation, I think.
It
Yes,
it
I
it
agree
it is.
wholeheartedly, Dave. And in fact, I would actually go further and say you use some words that make me cringe, like disillusion and disintegration and others. But
Mhm.
we have not been given the spirit of fear, but of love and power and of a sound thinking. And so
Mhm.
exactly is what we need to do in terms of focusing on this conversation. Structured thought. There are and have
Hmm.
been presented several models of how to approach reparations, both the calculation of it, both also in terms of who should be the recipients of the payment, how reparations, in other words, should be spent, whatever comes in. And we need to look at these models one by one, examine them for their integrity of logic, legal minds among us, and what and have you. And we need to therefore proceed in a structured way in terms of thinking about reparations. And so let me start that ball off in the matter of calculating reparations. And my thought on the issue of calculation of when I say calculating, I think much of the thought of the thinking that has gone into those figures that several persons have come up with, and as to what should be asked for, what should be demanded, etc. I think that is more for us than for them. In other words, we need to have, whenever I, for example, decide to do some work for somebody and give them my free labor or serve them and not ask for anything, I developed this, okay, let me send at least an invoice that gives the cost of my services so that they appreciate basically what has been granted to them. And that helps both them value me as well as me value myself. Without basically, if you work for free forever and there is no accounting of basically what has been given, you neither are setting yourself up to be valued by people nor for you to have any value for yourself.
Mhm.
So I don't think that those kinds of calculations need to, I mean, looking at the how much the crown is worth. The entire British monarchy is probably worth about 72 billion, I understand now. And when you think about what the debt that is owed in the Caribbean, that in itself. So I mean, a lot of those talks are for me, not necessarily escapes into fantasy, but they are exercises in quantifying. Okay, so over every 10 years of free slavery labor, in today's equivalent is about what? About 5 billion US, is it? So
I have no idea.
yes, I think it's about 5 billion. Well, check it out. Remember that there was 25 when the slaves were freed and emancipation. The assets, and this is the British way of valuation, which we need to repudiate, but we at least have to consider it first. That they thought that the total assets of the slaves, because we were given we were chattels, so we had an amount 45, is it thousand or million?
Million, please.
Million,
45
million.
million pounds at the time,
Yeah, good.
which in today's equivalent, I think 20 million pounds is the equivalent of about 6 billion US or something of the sort. Because the notion was that they paid 20,000 directly to the slave
Slave
owners,
owners.
and
Yeah.
then for the next 6 or 8 years, the 25,000 was worked off in so-called free labor. So that gives us an inclination. Well, if it takes about 6 to 8 years to pay off a 25 million pound debt, then we can say, all right, every 10 years of slave labor is worth about 28 or so million pounds, and work it out in today's currency. And you could add up the amounts from there. That's one way of giving a value. I don't like that value because it's basically, as I said, based upon valuing not human labor, but human beings. We had a sale value. I would much sorry, um, I'm mixing up the arguments. There is one way, in other words, by talking about the assets, but then there's another way in which you value labor, which is in fact what I believe is due. Even when we think about Beckel's presentation last August, and speaking about the free labor that was extracted even after slavery was abolished. Um, so I think that is a better way of calculation. Then now the issue of, okay, so let's say that some payment comes in. How is it prioritized? Because in the Coleman Hughes debate, they're talking about writing checks, particularly um, focusing on egregious Jim Crow policies, and after Jim Crow, that affected families in terms of housing, redlining. Um, and those victims are still alive today, many of them. And the state was complicit in that activity. And so they felt, even though, of course, the thing is wide, that if there is to be any check writing, then it would be to those specific things. And I certainly think that in terms of housing, if you look at the issues that several, I mean, from independence, um, free and affordable housing in the urban slum areas. What the government has been able to afford And the most annoying thing again is that when one is in power, they will streamline those housing projects to one side, and then another government comes into power, and that entire project basically waits for another 8 years or so until that government come into power again. And then if the funding is there, it is continued, or probably the concrete just stay there or rot. But um, affordable housing for the poor is definitely a major priority. And I mean, one of the things that is clear to me, I'm saying is, all right, let's not ask for any money. We're just saying, listen, we owe 15 billion US in terms of our external debt. Well, forgive us 5. That's the equivalent of about 10 years labor, right? And we redirect those funds. Or another thing, we could just literally stand up yourself and say, "We now pay you. You're just going to have to wait for that, because right now our people are more important than paying this debt, and we don't care what Standard and Poor's say after that." Of course, that would take a different category of leadership than we have now, but nevertheless, right? Um,
Right.
Housing is a major priority. That's one of the thoughts.
So, so that is kind of where my head is stuck. And thinking about the young people, as he spoke about the um, present realities, thinking about where are the young people at with this conversation? Um,
Yes.
what would be helpful to them now moving forward? And if they knew what we know, because we have heard, or we have read, or we have, if if they knew, what would their response be, and what would they want going forward?
We, in a very small seed, like we have just begun a process, which is why I'm so glad, Joanne, that you are doing your talk later, and that we need
Mm-hmm.
to continue basically, even if we are working with what the Bible calls a mustard seed in the beginning, but be diligent about the process, because the word needs to go out like yeast in terms of addressing how people think
Yeah.
about matters of self-repair and matters of relationships with those who have historically been our enemies and still are enemies in attitude and in motive, on many levels. And if we don't recognize that, then we are also being at enmity with ourselves. And so
Mm-hmm.
engaging the youth, engaging the church, and engaging the wider society in terms of, I think Coates's issue was, how do we get penetration? People have studied the thing, but, I mean, Beckles and uh, what's my sister's name again?
Shepherd.
Vereen. Um, and you go into the atmosphere of Huey, um, the history department and whatnot, and have you. Oh, yes, we are at a heightened level of awareness of what the issues really are.
Yes.
But them now penetrate. And so some of us will have to be penetrating.
Yeah. So, with the conversation we're going to be having with this, and how it is, I mean, we came up with it kind of last minute. It wasn't a long-term conversation that led to us deciding to do this today. We know we have Professor Rupert Lewis on next week. He's on by demand, because when he was on earlier on in 2020, people requested that we bring him back. So we were like, okay, what are we going to talk with him about? And knowing he's a member of the Reparations Council as well, kind of guided us back ways. And also listening to the lecture, I've watched it more than once, just wanting to share it with people in a context where there could be feedback. So we said, we can't just show the video. We need to have a conversation. It needs to be with. So we say, young people, where are they at? So we reached out to 4 young people that we knew. And one of the questions we're going to be, I mean, we're going to start very basic. So it's really the beginning of a conversation. Um, how much of this information in this lecture is news to you? You know, how much of it you knew already and how much is just new? And then, you know, a couple of other questions leading up to what do you think as people of the Jesus way? What do you think as Christ followers that our position should be, and what should we be doing now, um, in light of all of this information? So at least we are beginning the conversation. Anybody who asks questions that can be directed to Professor Lewis next week, we will table them for that discussion with him next week. But it really would be good if you know other young people to kind of direct them to the conversation as well.
And Joan
Yeah,
archives her stuff on YouTube, right?
it's on YouTube and it's on Facebook. It's on
Right.
Facebook first because it's live on Facebook on the
Hmm.
KW Magazine Facebook page, and then shortly after we upload it to
YouTube.
YouTube. Yeah.
John, thanks for calling me a young person. I noticed you said other young people. Thank you very much. I feel very flattered.
Other than the 4 that we invited, Nicholas Smith from JTS.
I thought you meant other than us.
Well, you can interpret it that way if you want to. I mean, I'm not going to stop you. So we have Nicholas Smith from JTS and Anya Jean Phillips. They're from different walks of life. There's Anord, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, but he's actually Tanzanian, living in Jamaica for 15 years now. So he came when he was very young.
Mm.
And a young lady from Trinidad, Candice Andrews. Yeah. So, and this is, we were going to let them watch it for the first time live on the show. And then we say, you know what is true? Let's not bother with the sensationalism. Let's get them prepared beforehand. And, you know, Candice was saying this is stuff she's never heard before. So I
That's
know,
the Becker's lecture.
yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
the Beckles lecture.
I got 2 surveys, by the way, Joan. I'm thinking they must have come from your group.
I don't know.
Because, oh no, Markel, one is from Markel. And yes, that was a profile that a lot of people recognize once they hear the lecture, that it definitely influences them.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. So one of the things too that we will do in the show is to give them the link to the survey, but it's just the one. So we'll have to give them the link to both the playlist and the survey. Yeah, so that they can
The
watch.
latest one, right? The latest, remember the first one is kind of was all over the place. So the
Yes.
second survey,
We,
which only has 2 videos.
oh,
One is
yes.
Beckles and the second one is the Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery one. And most people just
Roper.
uh-huh.
Hmm. Most
So,
people just
but I
what?
think you know that I think you have the latest one.
I think so. You say most people just do what?
Most people, the 2 persons who have responded so far, is just two responses, and both of them just listened to Beckles, and that was it.
Yes.
And I was glad for the feedback, um, and maybe that will inform a refined version where we just deal with one video at a time. Because I
Yes.
mean that was what people have been saying. To the
Yes.
first one, the whole string of videos, and everybody's no, so
And them
nobody knows
long.
time for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
survey. I think the survey only allows you to choose one though, and not indicate whether you want both. So it's possible that the persons did want
Yes,
both, but we have to maybe go back to the design of the survey
I think so.
for that particular question.
I can redesign it.
Yeah,
That's my recollection. And that the question kind of skewed
yeah.
away, like it.
You could only say you watch one.
Yes,
Yeah,
Oh.
yes.
yeah.
No, Well, the second one, the revised one, was just two. But I think I'm going to get just one video at a time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The business of getting the feedback was just seeing what works. So,
Going back
um,
to a point raised earlier about, what reparations would look like, and you made a point about relationships. It's not just about drawing a check, but that should be a part of it too.
Yes.
But bringing it down more closely to the church and people's cultural identity. So we all know that, the Jamaica that we grew up in, um, we had a Europeanized form of Christianity, um, and no problem with it being Europeanized, because the truth of God's word still shone through all of that. The issue though is that we have grown up to think European means superior
Mhm.
and African means distinctly inferior. And that's really the problem.
Yep.
that
And it's
fellow needs deliverance.
Yeah.
how do we elevate the African, what little of Africa we have retained in Johan? As you say, you go Moortown and the people them name is some anglicized name, and I'm going Anglican church and all of that, right? How do we elevate the African? Does a church, does a Caribbean church, does a Jamaican church, which has
Mm-hmm.
been over the years infusing distinctly Caribbean sounds and forms of worship into our Sunday morning experience. We've been doing that, which is a good thing. But how can we even go
Mm-hmm.
deeper into the aspects of our African heritage that we have retained? And how can we elevate that? How can we help people to say that it's not inferior? I think that has to be a part of the process of the repair, and that is definitely part of the self-repair that you talk about, Yakengele. And I think
Yes.
that we have more control over, and I think we need to be
Mm-hmm.
looking at how do we formulate these programs to go deeper, to do much more than what we've already done. And I mean, you're carrying the charge,
Yes.
Joanne, in a very powerful way. But in a sense that you feel that, boy, there's a lot of weight on you, because you don't see many other persons out there trying to do what you are doing.
So, what we are looking at, number one, is building a network of people with networks who will share the material, interact with the material, help us to connect with that tribe, right? Um, we are looking at focusing on high school grades 10 to 13 and college and university students, Jamaica, Caribbean, and everywhere else, Africa, because the people on the African continent are asking, so you don't want this to come to Africa? And I'm like, but it is in Africa, but it's just that it's still on a very small scale, right? But when I look at how critical this this whole engagement is, the information, what we're attempting to do, and I'm pretty sure that we could be even more impactful as we get deeper into the material. And just to see how hard it is to get both support financially and readership is, yeah, it's quite a challenge. This is why UTC, JTS,
Mhm.
NCU, the spaces where the people are being trained
Yes.
to lead the people. This is where we need to focus. The leaders. And you guys are the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network. So,
Here to serve.
Well,
yeah.
it's interesting because it goes back to Ephesians 4 in Yakengele, that the Lord gave the church the ministries, those fivefold ministries, the apostles,
Right.
evangelists,
And then
pastors, and teachers. And what I'm
Yes.
hearing Joanne saying is that we should be reaching out to the persons who are going to fill those leadership positions
Yeah.
so that they can lead the body to understand that this is a justice. This is about justice.
Yeah.
God,
Yes.
if you're a Christian, you ought to be about truth, mercy, justice, righteousness.
Yes.
And you can't say you are for those things and you are indifferent to the discussion on reparation.
It's because they don't understand and what they were taught. They were taught in the
Mm.
past. It went deep, and so they think that this is going contrary. I mean, I have been told by someone to whom I shared with whom I had shared a flyer of one of our events that she she really believes that this is a distraction from the work of the kingdom of God. And this is what a lot of people seem to think. So, how are we going to engage them in a conversation that may help them to see a little more clearly what we are seeing?
Yeah, that's right. It's
And
I
so,
hear you. I understand it. We have to. I think
Um,
you're right. We have to focus on that. I mean, Dave, you're here. At UTC, do we are we even having the students there read books like Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams, Professor Beckles, Britain's Black Death, Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa? Are they even reading those books at any point in time? You're muted, Dave. Your mic's muted.
I don't think so. I mean, to the extent that they might do some cross faculty courses in
I've
society or
I've
so.
gone through the doctoral research
Yeah.
dissertations over the years.
Yes,
Hardly anybody.
but no, they don't.
Especially JTS.
And one of the things that I'm trying to do in the next couple of weeks is to actually show the Joseph movie to the whole college, and the college has agreed to allow that to happen. And what I would love to do is to sort of have some conversation after it. So I'm linking with Marcia. I would love to include you to Joanne, and I'd love to get Stephen as well to have some conversation after the movie to talk about issues of our connections with our African heritage,
mhm,
and hopefully also to raise issues like the reparation issue. You know,
yeah.
but no, I find that the level of exposure in that direction is limited at, at,
Wow.
at the theological
Mhm,
training. And it might be true too even of the average tertiary education person.
mhm,
Yes.
So
mhm.
Yes.
except for those who are doing society and history, you probably might not get a lot exposed to that kind of literature and that kind of thinking.
Mm-mm.
You know, so
Yeah,
so
I think
you know,
also one of the things that I think that we need to be very careful about as Christians. I mean, I heard a discussion about the Christian understanding of justice,
yes,
but we have to understand that God speaks about to us in our own particular circumstances because of our background and where we see this. We understand that this is something of God's justice. For it's the same thing I was saying to Yakengele about not condemning somebody in another particular culture. While understanding the justice of what we do, we have to be very careful of not condemning somebody else who doesn't understand it in that context. And so I believe that we can have Christian brothers and sisters who understand God's justice and don't see the reparations argument. I think it is wrong if they condemn it. And
yes,
to John's point, it's important for us to be able to explain it in a Christian context so that they
mhm,
can understand and respect it. But we have to understand that there are some persons that we will never convince, right? So I know some people who have some views which I think are very, very interesting. That's why I wanted to have John Rooms is one of them who has a very interesting view in relation to it. And I'd want to hear John's views in this particular kind of context. Because although I don't agree with his views, I see and I understand his perspective. And that's a part of what we need to do in relation to this. We can't, I mean, the church has enough excuses to divide itself already. So we can't use this as one of the methodologies to do that. But I think it is an important part of the Christian experience to understand that someone can love Christ, understand Christ's justice, and see a position different from ours.
I would say, our church, like many others, um, does not see that as a central part of identity. Some people, in other words, it's good if you touch on it, but it's not a necessity. It's a nice add-on, but it isn't part of the core of who we are. That the core of who we are is we are Jesus people, and as Jesus people, we follow the scripture, but the issues of identity and relating to that may not come up as quickly. We have for a while been deliberate in trying to bring that about, both through what we do in our service and our liturgy, um, as well as, okay, so one of the material that we're using right now to teach our discipleship class at a basic level is from Accra, Ghana. The choice of the material was deliberately done, not that there is not easy that we could get through North America or Europe, but we wanted to affirm that things of God come also out of Africa and so forth. So it's a Ghanaian piece of material that we use to train our baptismal candidates and so forth. And the references we use, we are trying to be very deliberate to quote people who are from the global south as just part of the affirmation. And so Africa is included in the global south, but it's not limited to Africa, but it's part of the affirmation of the peoples who endured, years, because it wasn't just Africa, endured years of of second-class global citizenship. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
This is one thing I wanted to say, which is, and I'm glad you used the word conversations. And one thing in the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network is having respectful conversations. We don't encourage groupthink, and we like opposing views, but we want people just to be respectful when they're expressing their point of view. And we were, the center or the point of departure for the discussion today was the debate between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Coleman Hughes on Capitol Hill about reparation. And I think we kind of touched on it, but I wanted to make sure it was captured. The fact that it's actually good when you have ideas contending in the marketplace in that way. I think you come up with something far superior. Hegel and Marx, talked about the what was it? Thesis and antithesis, and then you get synthesis out of the conflict between thesis and antithesis. Covey talks about your way, my way, and then the best way, the third alternative, the best way. So I think out of these conversations and discussions, and I'm hoping that we'll see that kind of progression, that we'll have all of these different ideas and we throw it into a pot, and then what would come out of it is a very tasty and sumptuous meal. I just wanted to put that on the record before we start.
I suppose I guess I'm wondering how we can continue though the process of building awareness.
Of course, that is our focus for this year. We will be having a conversation such as this next month as well, and we're going to continue to build our relationships, and as those relationships get built, seek to leverage them in the spirit of the greatest synergy for service.